Those of you who don't spank your children don't have to tell us arrogantly, I don't spank my children. We know who your kids are. I'm Zach. This is The Average Christian. It's a project simply about learning what it means to have a relationship with God and how do I live that out in practical terms. Listen, children need, I don't care what you want to call it, we're going to say spanking. They need discipline. Yes, physical discipline at times. It has to be done right. Yes, I see these kids where parents refuse to. Look, there are all kinds of innovative ways, too, to discipline your children and to teach your children. We are not talking about abuse, so I don't want to hear any of that kind of stuff. I'll tell you how my dad did it. My dad did use a belt. He only once in his life hit me out of anger. And the only reason I remember that is because it's the only time he ever did it. And yes, it did scare me. But most times my dad, when I knew that I was going to get whipped, yes, it's okay to say that, whipped, when I knew it was coming, he would send me to the bathroom. He didn't want to put me in my room because he didn't want me to associate that with discipline, those types of things. Send me to the bathroom to wait. And sometimes he would have to cool off because he'd be angry. And he would come in and he would take care of business. I don't remember how many necessarily. And this happened when I was at a certain age, up to a certain age. Kids vary and so forth. Now, once he did that, most times he would leave. And of course, I'd be crying about it and be mad about it. And he would come back and he would ask me if I knew why he did what he did. And he would tell me that age-old phrase I don't think he ever said, it hurts me more than it hurts you, that kind of thing. But he would tell me how he hated to do that, how he hated for me to put him in the position to have to do that, but he had to, and I had to explain to him so I understood. Now, done that way, you may still have a problem with it, but if you are a child of God and a Christian, you got a problem with God. You have a problem with the Bible. You don't have a problem with me necessarily or my dad or others who incorporate this type of discipline. So I'm just going to give you some Bible here and leave it here. And for those of you who do practice this with your children, we understand that not every situation calls for this. Look, I have two boys, one of which would rather me talk to him when he was little, would rather me talk to him and yell at him and all that kind of stuff because he did not want the belt. And he would do anything he could to get it. So I knew the belt was effective for him. And if it got that bad, rarely, but if it got that bad, that's what he got. I have another one, act like he's not around anymore. I have another one who is, I did hit with the belt a couple of times, and that child never cried and would just look at you and say, I'm sorry, Daddy. Now, that same child, I could look at him in a certain way with that dad look, and it would break him down. And the one who took the beatings all the time, I say that, not literally, but the one who took the beatings all the time was always mad at his brother because his brother never got it. Well, his brother didn't need it that way. And so Proverbs 22:6 comes into play, train up a child in the way they should go. It's not the same for every child. And you rarely have to do that, but sometimes children need this kind of discipline, whether it's acceptable socially, whether the government wants to call it child abuse, whatever they want to say, I don't care. This is what God says about it. In Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 15, folly is bound up in the heart of a child. We understand that. Paul talked about in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, when I was a child, I spoke as a child. Basically, I acted like a child. Folly is bound up in the heart of the child, but the rod of discipline drives it far from him. It teaches children that there are consequences. It teaches children that there are serious times. Not all time is playtime. The whole world isn't about their fun and their smiles. Those are some of the mistakes we're making right now with our children. How about, if I can get my screen to work here, Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 24. Whoever spares the rod hates his son, his child. Whoever spares the rod. I always joked with my kids. I'm like, well, you got the hand, you got a belt. I ain't never hit you with a rod, so I don't know what you're complaining about. Now, all kidding aside here, if you decide that this is too terrible for your children, you can actually be doing them, you will be doing them a huge disservice and can actually be hating them and despising them by refusing this type of discipline. He who loves him is diligent to discipline him. Look, God says if he doesn't discipline you and me as children of his, then we can't even be called children. That's Hebrews chapter 12. So God disciplines us in order to correct us, in order to teach us, in order to put us in line. And why? For our own good. It's for the child's good as well. It's not for the parent to get out their anger. It's not for the parent to be abusive in any way, but certainly it is for the love of and the future of your child. Discipline your son. Proverbs chapter 19 and verse 18. Discipline your son, for there is hope. Do not set your heart on putting him to death. Now that one would be, there were times in the Old Testament laws were different. There were times for death according to children, or according to disobedience for children. And this one's saying, look, don't give up on him. Don't consider him, dead to rights, but discipline that child because there is hope. How do you create hope for a good future for a child that is respectful? Blows my mind. David, I won't give his last name because I don't want to embarrass him if he ever watches this. David was a college student when I was a campus minister, my first work, mid to late 20s. And David, we had 4 young children at the time. Gabe was a baby. And David came over and said, they would come to our devos with us. And he said, listen, your kids are so well behaved. How do you get them to behave so well? Just be calm and be still. I just looked him dead in his eyes and said, we beat him. And Dave did like this, right? Liberal arts, liberal college. So I thought, well, I'll push the sarcasm a little further. I said, Dave, don't worry, man. We hit him on top of the head where you can't see the marks. And then he about came apart. Look, there is hope for a child. How do you think we got our children to behave? They knew consequences. I remember my wife spanking my oldest daughter's hand when she was young. And I was young and dumb too at 21, 22 years old at the time. And she's spanking our daughter's hand. I'm thinking, wow, it's too early. But then she explained to me how a child can recognize and how they start pushing boundaries, even at a young age like that. And if you want to have hope for your children, there has to be this discipline, at times the kinds that we don't like and other people might call abuse. How about Proverbs 23 and verse 13? Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you strike him, and you could say, well, see, it doesn't specifically say what kind of discipline. It could just be timeouts all the time. It could just be groundings and taking things away and so forth. There's a place for those types of things. Not all the time, though. It's not every form of discipline, just like you wouldn't spank your child for everything they did wrong. If you strike him with the rod, he will not die. It'll be all right. It is going to hurt you if you do it. For those of you who are thinking about having children or have very young children, it's not enjoyable at all. It's difficult to do. But if you strike him with a rod, he won't die. This is to teach, not to destroy, not to inflict punishment, not to beat down or break the spirit, but to discipline a child. How about Proverbs 29 and verse 15? We'll stop with these 2 verses. The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. All these children that bring shame. I'm not just talking about the young generation and bunch of whippersnappers just don't have no discipline. Look, in every generation, there are children who are not disciplined properly, who are not looked after properly. Now we babysit our children with gadgets and technology and so forth, television down to tablets and all phones and whatever. But a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. Why? Because they have to be guided. We have to put the time and the effort in and do the things that are unpleasant and difficult. Also in verse 17, Proverbs 29, verse 17, discipline your son and he will give you rest. He will give delight to your heart. Like it's not, once again, I'll say it, I'm almost sounding apologetic, and I don't mean to sound that way at all. It's not saying that you pick up a rod, you pick up a stick, you pick up a belt or a fly swatter or a shoe or what wooden spoon, whatever it is, and just go swinging every time your child messes up. But there are varying degrees of consequences, and at times this kind of discipline is needed. Don't disrespect your child. Don't disrespect God, and don't show hatred to your child by not doing the things that are sometimes difficult for us to do as parents. I want to thank you for being with us today. If you're on YouTube and you have not yet subscribed, please hit this button over here, subscribe, help grow the channel. Also, please hit the like button if this helped you. This helps to get our videos suggested and so forth. And over here are videos that YouTube recommends, and one was the last one we released. Also, if you're listening on podcast, thank you so much for being with us. Would you please subscribe, rate, and review to help grow the channel, thereby helping other people by getting the message out? Please share this to help somebody else.